For 3 decades, Johnny Carson wasn't just a television host. He was the quiet heartbeat of American entertainment. Every night he brought joy and laughter into millions of homes. But behind the spotlight, Carson carried stories he never told on air. These weren't just tabloid tales. They were wounds he quietly honored and hid. Unlike others in Hollywood, Carson knew when silence meant more than a joke. He'd watched legends rise and fall, and when he spoke about their pain, it was with rare compassion. And here in this video, we're going to reveal the 7 saddest stories he kept close to him. Stories that Hollywood buried, but Carson never forgot. Number 7. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery had the kind of face that could stop traffic. But Johnny Carson once reportedly said that Clift's beauty was a double-edged sword. It opened every door in Hollywood, then quietly locked him inside. To Johnny, Clift wasn't just another fallen star. He was one of the most quietly tragic men to ever pass through the system. Clift changed film acting forever. His work in A Place in the Sun, From Here to Eternity, and The Misfits didn't just feel real, it felt exposed. Carson never had the chance to interview him. Clift passed in 1966, before The Tonight Show became what it was. But Johnny knew his story. Through friends, colleagues, and private conversations, he pieced together a picture that left him shaken. Clift's tragedy wasn't written in scandal headlines. It was much deeper. Carson reportedly told a friend that Clift's greatest pain came from trying to survive in a world that wouldn't let him be who he really was. In an era when being gay meant risking your career, Clift was forced to hide the most essential parts of himself while pouring all his truth into his characters. Johnny believed that tension between the man he was and the mask he had to wear was unbearable. Robert Redford once described Clift as the actor who made everyone else nervous. That line stayed with Johnny. He reportedly said it was because Clift's performances made people see things they weren't ready to see. He didn't act, he revealed. And in a business built on illusion, that kind of honesty could be dangerous. The 1956 car crash that shattered Clift's face wasn't just a physical injury. It was, as Johnny put it, a symbolic one. And that face had been both his weapon and his prison. After the accident, he lost the one thing the industry had allowed him to use freely. Carson believed it broke something in him that never healed. Clift struggled privately with addiction, self-loathing, and depression, but Johnny never judged him. What disturbed Carson most was how Clift's suffering was treated as inconvenient. People stepped away. Studios moved on. The industry that once called him brilliant quietly turned its back when his beauty faded and his pain became visible. Carson saw Clift as a casualty, not of fame, but of a system that demanded emotional honesty on screen and emotional silence off of it. He once told a confidant, "They wanted his soul for the performance but left him nothing for himself." When Clift died at 45, it barely made headlines. Johnny never forgot. And he saw in Clift the cost of living a life split in two, the actor and the man, both trying to breathe through a system that crushed them slowly. And what haunted Carson most wasn't the fact that Clift died young. It was how long he lasted under the weight of it all. Number 6. Judy Garland. I am a woman who wants to reach out and take 40 million people in my arms. Well, that was why Judy loved to perform, to connect, comfort, and console her beloved fans. And she did just that during her legendary run as one of Hollywood's brightest stars. But Johnny Carson, who sat across from her more than once on The Tonight Show, saw something else behind those radiant eyes. He saw the weight she carried. And in private conversations, he admitted it broke his heart. Johnny adored her talent. That voice, he said, could stop time. But what stayed with him wasn't the songs. It was the sadness. Long after the applause faded, Johnny still spoke about Judy as one of the most tragic figures he ever encountered. She wasn't just a cautionary tale. She was a child who never got to be a child. MGM signed her at 13 and immediately decided she wasn't good enough. Too round, too plain, and too human. So they gave her pills. Amphetamines to speed her up, barbiturates to bring her down. This wasn't hidden. Doctors signed off. Her mom cooperated. Directors waited for the drugs to kick in. That was the system. Johnny once told a close friend, "They drugged a child to keep her working, and everyone just accepted it." That's what haunted him. Not only what they did, but how routine it all seemed. Nobody stopped to ask what it might do to her. Nobody wanted to. Yeah, by the time Garland reached her 20s, she was battling dependence, breakdowns, and long stretches of depression. Yet the studio kept pushing. They worked her 18, sometimes 20 hours a day. When she collapsed, they propped her back up. She smiled on cue, and the audience never saw the crash behind the curtain. Carson never made jokes about Judy, never allowed her name to be thrown into monologue drafts. When she appeared on the show late in her life, he said it felt like watching someone underwater, arms waving for help while everyone clapped from the shore. The sadness in her eyes, he believed, was the truth Hollywood refused to admit. When she died at 47, from the same class of drugs they started giving her as a child, Johnny wasn't shocked. He was just angry. He once said her tragedy wasn't that she lost the fight. It was that she lasted as long as she did. Number 5. Veronica Lake. At the height and peak of World War II, every single woman wanted Veronica Lake's hairstyle. That peekaboo wave made her an icon almost overnight. Her image wasn't just on movie posters, it was stitched into the fabric of the American home front. And yet, just a few decades later, she was serving drinks behind a bar. When Johnny Carson learned what became of her, he reportedly said, "There's nothing lonelier than a smile with nowhere to go." Johnny never interviewed her. By the time he took over The Tonight Show, Veronica had long disappeared from the screen. But the stories filtered through, conversations with studio veterans, whispered anecdotes from industry parties, and what he pieced together disturbed him more than he let on. She had everything: a unique look, like a string of hit films, and a country that fell in love with her. But Carson believed she was never truly protected. Lake was described as difficult on set, a label that followed women faster than men. Behind that label, Johnny suspected, were unaddressed mental health issues, growing addiction, and a quiet but deep cry for help. By the early 50s, the studios were done with her. Tastes had changed. So had the roles. Lake had a few marriages behind her, a drinking problem, and no one left fighting for her. According to insiders Carson trusted, she drifted from cheap apartments to odd jobs, eventually landing as a bartender in a New York hotel. Some customers recognized her. Some didn't believe her. The rest didn't care. Carson found it shameful. Here was a lady whose face helped sell war bonds, and who had lifted national morale at one of the darkest times in history. And she was discarded the moment her image no longer sold. Johnny once said she was treated like a product with an expiration date. Once the shine faded, she was on her own. She died in 1973, just 50 years old, from complications related to alcoholism. There were no headlines or public outpouring. It was a quiet end to a life once lived under a spotlight. Carson reportedly told a friend that most people assumed she'd died long before that. That's how complete her erasure had been. To Johnny, Veronica Lake wasn't just a forgotten actress. She was the human cost of a system that praised youth, punished complexity, and walked away when the cameras stopped rolling. He never joked about her. He couldn't. There was nothing funny about being used up and left behind. At number 4, Natalie Wood. Natalie Wood's life looked like a dream. From child star to Hollywood royalty, her grace lit up classics like Rebel Without a Cause and West Side Story. But Johnny Carson knew the dream wasn't the full story. He'd interviewed her often, admired her charm, but also sensed the fear beneath it. She never felt safe, he reportedly said, not even in love. Her 1981 death, drowning near Catalina Island while boating with husband Robert Wagner and actor Christopher Walken, was ruled accidental. But Carson, like many, quietly questioned that. Conflicting accounts. Alcohol. A long-known fear of dark water. It didn't add up. Wood's life had been shaped by the studio system since childhood. Carson believed she never truly had a chance to grow up outside the spotlight. She was always performing, even off camera. What haunted him wasn't just her death, but the silence surrounding it. He saw her not just as a star lost too soon, but as someone never given real safety or care. To Johnny, her story reflected how fame can protect your image, while leaving the real person completely alone. Now let's talk about number 3, Gig Young. Gig Young could charm any room. On screen, he had that effortless mix of wit and wounded elegance, the kind of presence that made him unforgettable. When he won the Oscar for They Shoot Horses, don't they? In 1969, many thought it was his overdue breakthrough, but Johnny Carson knew better. He once told a close friend that Gig Young's story wasn't a triumph. It was a slow, quiet tragedy hiding behind applause. Carson had seen Young work a set, always playing the sophisticated. Slightly broken man with a drink in hand and a punchline on his lips. What most didn't see, Johnny did. The real version of that role didn't end when the cameras stopped. That brokenness followed Young everywhere. Behind every laugh was a struggle, and it never let go. Young's drinking wasn't gossip in Hollywood. It was a fact that everyone worked around. Directors tolerated it. Studios looked the other way. Carson understood that routine all too well. He fought his own demons and recognized the pattern. Gig wasn't just drinking to party. He was drinking to survive the noise inside his head. Johnny reportedly once said that Young was the kind of guy who made pain look like comedy until the punchline ran out. The Oscar, he felt, didn't help. It raised expectations, but didn't heal anything. Instead of revitalizing his career, it left him more alone when the roles didn't come. He believed he'd arrived, but the phone didn't ring. And the silence made everything worse. In 1978, the silence broke violently. 3 weeks after marrying Kim Schmidt, Gig shot her in their New York apartment, then turned the gun on himself. It shocked everyone. But Carson, he didn't laugh, didn't try to soften the horror. A longtime staffer said it was one of the few headlines he refused to joke about. It shook him deeply. What haunted Johnny most wasn't the violence, but how preventable it should have been. Gig had cried out for help for years, in and out of treatment, lost in addiction, known but not truly helped. Carson saw it as the industry's failure, one of many. A man who gave his talent to the world and got indifference in return when he unraveled. Johnny believed Hollywood had a way of turning vulnerability into a brand, then walking away when it got too real. Gig Young was never just a cautionary tale to him. He was a man who wasn't saved when he could have been. Number 2, George Reeves. To a generation of children, George Reeves wasn't an actor. He was Superman. But Johnny saw something behind the cape that others missed. Reeves, known for playing the invincible hero, was quietly unraveling. Children believed he couldn't be hurt, often testing it by hitting him in public. But Carson reportedly said, "He saved the world for kids, and nobody saved him." Reeves longed to be taken seriously as an actor, but the Superman role became a golden cage. He was adored but typecast, praised but creatively suffocated. Carson believed that kind of disconnect between who you are and what the world expects could destroy a person. Reeves's death in 1959 was ruled a suicide, but whispers never stopped. He had been involved with Toni Mannix, the wife of a powerful MGM executive. Then another woman. A night of strange circumstances followed. Carson never accused anyone but privately doubted the official story. What stayed with him was the irony. The man known for being bulletproof, found dead by a bullet. Carson saw it not as a mystery, but a tragedy. A man crushed by the weight of his own myth. Number 1. Marilyn Monroe. Well, no one lit up a screen quite like Marilyn Monroe. And yet Johnny Carson once said she was the loneliest woman he ever saw. That's what stuck with him. Not the beauty, not the glamour, but the hollow ache beneath it. To Carson, Marilyn wasn't just a symbol of fame. She was proof of how brutally the industry could destroy someone it once claimed to love. They never shared the Tonight Show couch, but Johnny saw her often at award shows, industry gatherings, whispered stories from mutual friends. What he learned from those encounters never left him. Monroe's legacy was glossy, seductive, iconic. But the real woman was fragile, deeply insecure, and constantly seeking something she never quite found. Carson reportedly told his staff he never laughed at Monroe's jokes, wouldn't allow them. He said, "She was already made into a punchline by people who never knew her." That level of reverence was rare, and for Johnny, it came from knowing how deeply Monroe had been used. She'd been plucked out of obscurity, rebranded, renamed, and recast into someone the world would crave. But it wasn't who she really was. Johnny believed the studio system broke her by first exploiting her vulnerability, then discarding her once the cracks began to show. He once said she was too sensitive for the men who signed her checks. Monroe wanted to be taken seriously like others. She studied acting, started her own production company, and pushed for better roles. But every time she tried to assert herself, the same people who built her image shut her down. Carson reportedly found this especially cruel. She had depth, ambition, intelligence. But no one wanted that from her. They wanted the fantasy. Her addiction struggles, bouts of depression, and rumored involvement with powerful political figures only deepened the darkness that surrounded her. Johnny never speculated on the cause of her death, but he questioned the way it was handled. It didn't sit right with him. The silence, the loose ends. What he did say, though, was that the real tragedy wasn't her final night. It was the life that led her there. He once told a confidant, "She was in every room but belonged to none of them." That loneliness, the disconnect between the world's adoration and her personal isolation, was what haunted him most. Monroe's legacy was eternal, but the woman behind it was forgotten long before she died. Carson never let himself forget her. She was, in his mind, the ultimate proof that fame could not only fail to save you, it could be the very thing that ends you. We hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for hanging with us, and be sure to like and subscribe. We'll see you very soon.